So digital detox, huh? Seems like everyone's talking about it these days, yeah, trying to break free from their devices and all that. But you're here for more than just a quick overview, right? You want to really dig into why we're all so hooked, what the science says about this whole digital thing.
And the good news is there's a ton of research out there now.
Yeah.
Psychologists, neuroscientists, even tech people are weighing in on this. It's fascinating stuff. It's not just about feeling better either. We're talking about some pretty fundamental impacts.
Exactly. It's like our digital lives are reshaping us from the inside out. And honestly, some of this stuff I wish I'd known years ago. Like this whole dopamine thing, for instance. Expert speaker, can you break that down for us? What's really going on in our brains when we're glued to our phones? What is this digital addiction everyone's talking about anyway?
It all boils down to our brain's reward system. You see, whenever we engage in certain activities, whether it's scrolling through social media feeds or even just getting a notification ping, our brain gets a little surge of dopamine. And dopamine, that's our pleasure chemical. So basically, every notification, every bit of engagement triggers a feeling of reward, making us want to repeat the behavior.
So it's like our phones are basically tiny slot machines, and we're chasing that dopamine rush with every swipe and tap. I knew those little red notification bubbles were up to something.
It's a really powerful mechanism. And while dopamine is essential for tons of healthy brain functions, think motivation, learning, even movement, when we're constantly bombarded by these digital dopamine hits, it can disrupt the balance.
Digging into them.
It can lead to craving, dependence, and that feeling of being utterly glued to our devices, even when we know we should be doing something else.
It's like we're training our brains to prioritize those quick hits of satisfaction over everything else. And then we wonder why we can't seem to put our phones down. Makes sense, though. Scary, but it makes sense.
And it's not just about feeling tethered to our phones. This constant digital engagement starts to affect other areas of our lives as well. And one of the biggest concerns is its impact on our relationships. Researchers actually have a term for this. It's called technoference.
Technoference. Technoference. I feel like I've heard that before, but to be honest, with all the tech jargon flying around these days, it all starts to sound the same. Can you remind us what that means exactly?
Sure. Picture this. You're out to dinner with your partner, right? Maybe it's a special occasion. But instead of being present, actually connecting with you, their eyes are glued to their phone, scrolling through social media or whatever. Maybe you're trying to have a conversation, but their attention keeps drifting back to that little screen. That, my friend, is technoference in action.
Ouch. Yeah, we've all been there one time or another, right? Either on the giving or receiving end of that. But it's not just like a funny anecdote or a relatable moment. Is there actually evidence that this is a problem?
Oh, absolutely. Studies are now showing a pretty clear link between this kind of technology-driven interruption and lower relationship satisfaction. And it's not just a dip in satisfaction either. Some research suggests it can even lead to increased symptoms of depression and anxiety, even lower overall life satisfaction.
Wow, okay. So maybe those unplug and connect messages aren't just some marketing ploy after all. This is actually impacting our well-being in a pretty significant way. So we're not just talking about a few missed high fives here. This is serious stuff. But before we get too down in the dumps, is it all bad news? I mean, what about couples who use tech to stay connected, you know? Sending each other sweet messages or sharing funny memes. There's got to be some upside to tech and relationships, right?
You're absolutely right. It's not all doom and gloom. Context is everything. And there's actually research to support your point. One study found that sending positive messages through technology, think heart emojis, little compliments, those kinds of things, was actually linked to higher relationship satisfaction.
Really? So it's like those little digital love notes can actually make a difference.
It seems that way. It's like those small gestures, even if they're digital, can help reinforce a sense of connection and appreciation.
Okay, that's actually really interesting. So maybe it's less about demonizing technology altogether and more about being mindful of how we're using it. It's about finding that healthy balance, right? Like with most things in life.
Exactly. And that brings us to another biggie in the digital world, social media. We've got a whole stack of research on its potential downsides, and it goes way beyond just feeling envious of everyone's perfect Instagram feeds.
Speaking of Instagram, I was just thinking about that whole comparison is the thief of joy thing.
Yeah.
You scroll through your feed and everyone seems to be living their best, most glamorous life. And it makes your own life feel kind of, well, a little less exciting.
It's that classic grass is always greener phenomenon, amplified by the curated perfection of social media. And it taps into something very real. Social comparison theory suggests that we're naturally wired to compare ourselves to others, and social media just throws fuel on that fire.
It's like this constant game of keeping up with the Joneses, except now the Joneses are influencers with perfect lighting and professional photographers. No wonder we feel inadequate sometimes. But it's not just about feeling a little down, right? There's a real impact on mental health here, isn't there?
Absolutely. Studies have shown a strong correlation between heavy social media use and increased feelings of anxiety, depression, and even loneliness. It's like instead of connecting us, all that scrolling and comparing can actually make us feel more isolated.
And what about younger people? You'd think growing up surrounded by this technology would make them immune to those effects, but that's not necessarily the case, is it?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But the research suggests otherwise. In fact, studies are showing that children who start using social media at a young age might actually be more vulnerable to negative well-being effects later on.
Wow, that's kind of scary when you think about it. Their brains are still developing, still figuring out who they are, and then they're hit with this barrage of seemingly perfect lives and unrealistic beauty standards. It's a lot to process.
It really is. And it highlights the importance of having open conversations with kids about social media use, setting healthy boundaries early on, and modeling those boundaries ourselves as adults.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've covered the dopamine rush, the potential strain on relationships, the social comparison trap. But there's another big one we can't forget about, especially for all those night owls out there. I'm talking about sleep.
Ah, sleep. The holy grail of modern life, so often sacrificed at the altar of screen time.
Tell me about it. You know that feeling when you're lying in bed telling yourself just one more video, and then suddenly it's 2 a.m., you've got to be up in a few hours.
We've all been there. It's so easy to get sucked into that endless scroll. But what we might not realize is that it's not just the time we're losing. Our devices emit blue light, and exposure to blue light, especially at night, can actually interfere with our sleep.
Blue light. I vaguely remember learning about this back in high school biology class. What's the connection with sleep again?
So our bodies have this natural sleep-wake cycle, right? And it's regulated by a hormone called melatonin. Melatonin tells our bodies it's time to wind down for the night. But when we expose ourselves to blue light, especially from screens, it suppresses melatonin production.
So even though we might feel like we're relaxing with our phones, those screens are actually sending our brains a wake-up signal.
Exactly. And then we wonder why we're tossing and turning, unable to fall asleep. It's like trying to sleep with a spotlight shining on your face. And the irony is that lack of sleep actually exacerbates many of the issues we've already discussed. It can make us more impulsive, more reactive, and even more likely to reach for our devices for a quick dopamine fix.
It's a vicious cycle. We can't sleep, so we scroll more, which makes it even harder to sleep, and on it goes. This is starting to feel a little heavy. We've uncovered a lot of potentially negative impacts of our digital lives. I don't know about you, but I'm ready to throw my phone in a drawer and run for the hills. Okay, maybe not that extreme, but seriously, knowing all this is one thing. What do we do about it? Going completely off the grid seems a bit much, don't you think?
You're preaching to the choir. Most of us can't just disappear into the wilderness and ditch our devices completely. But that's not really the point of a digital detox anyway. The key is to find a healthier balance, to be more intentional about our relationship with technology.
Okay, so less about a full-on tech boycott and more about hitting the reset button on our digital habits. But where do we even begin? It's like our phones are practically glued to our hands these days.
It's true. It can feel overwhelming to even think about changing those habits, which is why I always suggest starting small. Instead of trying to overhaul your entire digital life overnight, pick 1 or 2 things you can realistically change.
Okay, I like that. Small, manageable steps. But what kinds of changes are we talking about? Give us some examples.
Well, let's start with your morning routine. What's the first thing you do when you wake up? If the answer is grab my phone, maybe try setting a different intention. How about creating a tech-free zone in your bedroom? Start your day with a book, a quiet cup of coffee, a walk in nature. Those first few moments can really set the tone for the rest of the day.
I love that. It's like hitting the refresh button before the digital noise creeps in. But what about when we are using our devices? Any tips for making those interactions a little healthier?
Absolutely. Mindful engagement is key. One simple thing you can do is turn off those non-essential notifications. You know, those constant pings and buzzes that pull you back into your phone every 5 minutes. Do you really need an alert every time someone likes your Instagram photo? Probably not.
Talk about a recipe for distraction. So we're curating our notifications, creating some tech-free zones, starting small. It's like we're building a roadmap for a healthier relationship with technology. And maybe even rediscovering some of those pre-smartphone joys along the way, right?
Exactly. Remember those hobbies you used to love or those books you always meant to read? Maybe it's time to dust them off. A digital detox isn't just about less screen time. It's about making space for those things that bring us genuine joy and connection.
It's about reclaiming our time and attention and remembering what it feels like to be truly present in our lives. This has been an amazing deep dive. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling inspired, not overwhelmed. I'm ready to trade in some of that mindless scrolling for a little more real-life living.
That's what we like to hear. Remember, even small changes can make a world of difference. And who knows, you might even inspire someone else to take a little digital detox of their own.
Absolutely. So, listeners, we want to hear from you. What's one small step you're willing to take today to reclaim your time and attention? Let us know. And until next time, happy disconnecting.